Imagine trying to go to sleep. You are exhausted, but you couldn't, because the sound of the bombings are everywhere. That whining mosquito-like incoming bombings growing louder and louder until it exploded somewhere just around the corner. Your entire house shakes. Your entire being shakes. You hide under the cover and hoping desperately for it to all go away. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Harry's Book Cafe. The depiction that I have drawn in the beginning of the introduction are all too real for refugees from Syria. And that brings to the topic of today's discussion, The Beekeeper of Aleppo. I have purchased this book on Kindle quite some time ago, but I haven't really had the time to read it, and the only reason that I have read it recently is because the more vitriolic political climate in the UK currently, especially coming from the Conservative Party, BB Stockholm, the Rwanda policy, taking down the murals of a child refugee centre because that mural might give the wrong impression of UK being too welcoming. Also calling those refugees fighting age rather than working age. Those deliberate vitriol is what really encouraged me to actually read this book, just to see from the refugees' perspective, to get a little bit more empathy. So a little bit about the story. The story follows the journey of a couple, a Syrian couple, escaping from Syria because obviously the war zone. They have lost their baby boy, I think who's only 6-year-old, when a bomb falls not far from their house. And the boy at the time was playing in the garden and the shockwave killed him. With nothing to really help them, they decided to, on an epic journey from Syria, to come to the UK. Now, the gentleman of the story, he is a beekeeper in Syria. He loves his job passionately. He cares about the bees. He feels as one with the bees. He brings him happiness and financial security. He and Mustafa, who was his cousin. So the tragic strike, as I said, the main character lost his son, and Mustafa, his cousin, also lost his two. So Mustafa was the one who came to the UK first, and then the journey really began for our main protagonist, the gentleman and the husband and wife. The journey was not easy at all, as you would have imagined. They escaped Syria via a smuggler who have to drive them out of Syria into Turkey in the darkness of the night. And it was lucky that they actually, at this very beginning of the journey, they actually got away with their life, because on their route, unbeknown to them at the time, there was a sniper hiding in one of the water towers. Had they chosen that particular route, they would have been killed, no doubt. But luckily for them, on their route, they met a guy on a bicycle who was in desperate need of water. So he borrowed water from the driver, and then he told him, do not go that road, go around, and to avoid that sniper. And so they did, and they managed to get across into Turkey. Now that journey, there's a river dividing Turkey from Syria, and in that particular crossing, they were watching some heartbreaking scenes of a father whose daughter had to, for whatever reason, can't follow his daughter to Turkey. So he pushed his daughter to cross the river with other refugees, while he himself had to stay behind and burst into tears. And that is, as a father, personally, I find that really strikes something inside me, quite reverberated inside my heart, and it's really heartbreaking because I'm trying to imagine being that father, standing in his shoes. How would I feel? And I couldn't. I don't even want to contemplate that particular possibility because it's too painful. But anyway, so the couple managed to cross into Turkey, where they were making their way slowly to Istanbul, where they basically got stuck. They lived with in a smuggler's apartment for quite a long time because they were waiting to cross into Greece. Now, the water between Istanbul and Greece are pretty rough at that time of the year, so they're waiting for the weather to change in their favor. And it's at that time, in that precise moment, the main character, he started to seeing things that not quite there. I don't want to give too much away, but just put that out there. He's became rather a unreliable narrative when we see things from his perspective. Except as reader at the time, we don't know that is the case. So it leads us in believing what he sees. What he sees is actually the reality, which isn't the case. But anyway, let's move on. So from that moment on, they waited for the weather to change. When they finally did, they embarked on this really perilous journey between Istanbul and Greece, one of the Greek islands. The sea was rough, even though that was one of the calmest they have encountered. And quite a few people actually, when a particular vigorous wave hit them, quite a lot of people got overboard and had to be rescued. So it was quite a tense moment in the book. When they finally arrived in that Greek island, things started to become a little bit easier. They waited for rescue, and once they did, they will manage to get themselves to Athens. That's where the story really starts to get a little bit dark, really getting dark in fact. Lots and lots of bad things happened in Athens section. It's really, part of it is quite difficult to read. There's something that happened to the female protagonists that was really heartbreaking, and something happened to the male protagonist, the main character, which is also very, very heartbreaking. And you trying to picture, I mean, that's the beauty of fiction, isn't it? That gives you empathy. You're trying to stand in their shoes and try to picture what would you do in that sort of situation. And I precisely put myself in their shoes, and I couldn't think of anything other than what they did in the story. So yeah, lots of dark things actually happened in Athens. It was not a happy section of the book, and the story was written by a author who actually spent a lot of time in the Athens refugee sort of campus center, refugee center, and most of the incidents that she wrote in the book are actually based on real life stories. So it's very dark in that part. But anyway, so as the story progresses, they finally moved to England, where they are seeking asylum. The structure of the story is quite nicely done. It's told in two tenses. So it's divided into the journey from Syria to England, and England itself, London itself. So everything that's based in England is told in present tense, where they are in the process of trying to get the asylum. And the reason that it's told in the present tense is because it gives you the sense that nothing has decided yet. The journey itself is told in the past tense, and those two tenses are mixed together. So one chapter might be in England, that's told in present tense, and then another chapter told in Syria, and that's told in a past tense, which is quite nicely done. You got this twist, which is really nice. The writing is beautiful, very lyrical. She certainly can write. There's quite lots of lyrical sentences which I really appreciate. As the story progresses, we start to get a sense of the relationship between the husband and the wife, and it's not an easy relationship. Certainly not after war break out. There's the relationship start to deteriorate under the stress of the situation, under the stress of the war, the loss of their only son. that relationship is really being tested and pushed to its limit. Think of chewing gum that's being pulled thinner until the moment before it breaks. I think that's a good description of describing that relationship. It's not always warm. In fact, as throughout the story, we've never been told that the relationship is very warm. I mean, we don't see it. It might happen before the war, but we don't know. I mean, it's certainly implied in that sense. But that relationship is really, really complicated, especially as the story progresses, as both characters are under enormous pressure. It's not always easy. Overall, a very great story. It does give me a sense of what real refugee has to go through just to be here in England. There's lots of rhetoric from the current Conservative government and from the ministers telling about they should go back to France, France being a safe country. There are many reasons why a refugee would choose to come to the UK, language being the number one. And the number two reason is because there are so many, they might have a relative already here, like the story depict in this particular book. Their cousins already made way here. By international law, there's absolutely no restriction that a refugee had to stay in the first safe country. If that is the case, then all the Ukrainian would have stayed in Poland, which clearly isn't the case. So those Conservative ministers are basically talking nonsense. And I think the current political climate, I don't know who they are catering to be perfectly honest. I mean, there are obviously really red-wing people, but they're not sufficient to warrant such visceral sort of reaction, the rhetoric coming from the current Conservative Party. Suella Braverman, honest, Bob Jenrick, 30p Lee, all these geniuses. But anyway, so having read that book, it really gives me a sense of what they have to go through, the real struggle that they have to go through. They don't want to be here. I mean, for sure, some economic migrant, but most of them don't want to be here because of economic reasons, purely because their home is being destroyed. Anyway, politics aside, what about the book itself? I like it. However, I couldn't give it a 5-star, and the reason for that is because there's depictions what life is like before the war, especially around the family, but it simply isn't enough. I think the story given before the war is really not sufficient. We don't have a sense of what's going on. We don't have the sense of people's relationship. That part of the story isn't really that nicely done. The journey itself is fantastic, but I do wish that there are more backstories before the war started. Just to give you a quick example, when we talk about, Half of Yellow Sun, I don't know if you read that particular book, but that's about the Nigerian civil war in the 1950s, I believe. And that story, nearly half of it is the backstory of what life is like and people's relationships before the war happened. And when the war does happen, you got that sense of, oh my God, something is really going on. You feel scared, you feel anxious for the characters involved. Here, because the writer didn't really give enough time, didn't give enough pages for the character to develop themselves before the war happens. When the war did happen, I don't feel the same impact as I had done with the characters in Half of Yellow Sun. That's pretty much the only criticism I have for the book. Overall, I think it's absolutely fantastic. As I said, the writer does have a way of writing very beautiful sentences with beautiful structure. I really like that. And I think it should be a required reading for the current government ministers to read. I'm definitely recommending for many of us to actually read it, because it does give us empathy. And I think what the fascist government is really scared of is empathy, isn't it? To have an educated population. But yeah, that's the review of the Beekeeper of Aleppo. I hope you enjoyed it. Have you read it? Please leave a comment down below and let me know. And if so, what do you make of it? If not, are you planning to give it a go in the future? Let me know, and give us a thumb up and subscribe. It really does help a new channel like mine. So until next time, cheerio.